others have at home. I'm Julie Lafford, Executive Director for Alumni Engagement at York University. Thanks for joining us today for a lecture entitled To Protest or Not, Dilemma for Olympic Athletes, featuring Associate Professor Hernan Umania in the Faculty of Kinesiology and Health Sciences. First, I want to begin, as we always do, by acknowledging the land that York's campuses are built on. It's more important than ever to acknowledge this land we're on in order to honor the Indigenous peoples of Turtle Island, their inherent rights to this land, and because this is a simple and important step that settlers and all of us can take as we work towards reconciliation. As this event is virtual, and I know we're not all gathered in the same place, I recognize that the land acknowledgement I'll read now might not be for the territory you're currently on. If that's the case, please take the responsibility to acknowledge the land you're on and the current treaty holders. The website native-land.ca is a good resource for this. As a member of the York University community, I recognize that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships with the territories upon which York University campuses are located, and these precede the establishment of York University. York acknowledges its presence on the traditional territory of many Indigenous nations. The area known as Takaronto has been caretaken by the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat. It's now home to many First Nation, Inuit, and Métis communities. We acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. This territory is subject to the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. I am personally grateful for the opportunity to live and work on Treaty 13 land, and for all that I have learned and continue to learn from Indigenous peoples at York University and beyond. Before we introduce our speaker today, I'm pleased to welcome the most recent group of graduates to the York U alumni family. Last month, more than 10,000 students graduated and joined a group of more than 350,000 alumni around the world. Welcome, we're so proud of you. As usual, we'd like to get to know our audience a bit better with a quick poll before our lecture. Today's question is, how would you rate your knowledge regarding the topic of today's presentation? So that will pop up on your screen right now, and please take a moment to respond to that. Thanks everybody for participating. As always, it's helpful for us and for our speakers to have an idea about who's in the audience and the knowledge that each of you bring to today's lecture. If you need help with the Zoom webinar, feel free to click on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and enter your question there. Our team is ready to help you. That same button can be used to submit questions for our guest speaker to answer during the Q&A period following today's presentation. And for those of you watching live on Facebook, feel free to submit any questions or comments through the comments section there, and the team will send them my way. Please note that all of your questions and comments are visible to our panelists and staff working behind the scenes. We ask that you keep your comments both relevant and respectful. So on today's talk. Today's talk features Associate Professor and York alumnus Hernan Umania from the School of Kinesiology and Health Science in the Faculty of Health. Professor Umania has attended 3 Olympic Games with Team Canada. At the 1992 Barcelona Olympics, he was the team leader for the men's volleyball team. At the 1996 Atlanta Olympics, he was a men's beach volleyball head coach and earned a bronze medal. And at the 2000 Sydney Olympics, he again was a men's beach volleyball head coach. He's also coached the York University women's volleyball team for 10 years and has been teaching at the School of Kinesiology and Health Science since 1998 in the area of socio-cultural studies of sport, physical activity, and health. He also has 2 children, Felipe and Melissa. They are also both York alumni and both have played for the Canadian national beach volleyball team. Melissa, right now, is on her way to represent our country at the Olympic Games in Tokyo. So welcome, Professor Umania. I'm super excited to hear from you today. You can turn your camera and mic on now and join us. There he is.
Thank you, Julie. Hello.
Hello, welcome. Welcome. So I'll turn things over to you. You can share your screen and I'll be back at the end of your presentation to moderate the Q&A.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Let me start here. And I think Well, it's a pleasure to be here. I think I haven't had this opportunity, and so to address our alumni friends and graduates, it's always an honor and a privilege. I don't take it lightly. And I think I'm glad I'm presenting because this topic is unfolding as we speak. There are changes on a minute basis. I was going to say on a day basis, but on a minute basis, things are changing. If you have been following the Olympics already, or you may be tired of the Olympics by now, you'll know that in the two soccer games yesterday between England and Chile and between USA and Sweden, all the players kneeled before the game in sign of protesting, but also supporting social justice and issues of race, and it melts my heart. I have to be honest. So I guess the answer it's to my question is quite clear. There is not a dilemma any longer. Athletes are protesting, and we'll see how the IOC, the International Olympic Committee, will respond to that. But I again, as I was watching the games, I thought, there goes my talk. The answer is clear. It's not a dilemma. They are going to protest. And there is a disclaimer that Julie already mentioned. My daughter is there. And I wanted to share with you this cute little video, 1 minute of Melissa. Let me go at it with you. And it is here. And here we go.
Gary learns about beach volleyball. Aloha, and I'm so happy you're here. It's Gary the Unicorn, and right beside me here is super duper Melissa Humaniparades. Hello!
Hi, Gary. How are you?
I'm very good. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
What sport will you be competing in at this year's Olympic Games?
I will be competing in beach volleyball.
Oh, really? So what's the best part about playing beach volleyball?
I get to share all the experiences and travel the world with my beach volleyball partner.
So you guys are good friends, and you get to play volleyball together all over the place.
That's right. And then after we play, usually we can build sandcastles after.
See? That's why I want to go play beach volleyball with you.
Sure, yeah. I have a volleyball right here, actually. So I can show you one of my favorite skills, which is how to volley. You volley the ball. You think you can try?
Yeah, okay.
Okay, ready?
Just drop it on me.
Okay.
Ready?
Here you go. Oh.
Am I doing it?
I think you lost it.
Oh. Maybe I should never be a volleyball player ever.
No, that's not true, Gary. You can always try again. It took me a long time to master my skills.
Really? And now you're part of Team Canada.
Yeah.
So maybe if I just try it again, maybe I'll just get better at it.
Yeah, do you want to try again?
I do want to try it again.
Okay, ready?
Yes, I am.
Here you go.
Okay.
Oh my gosh, wow!
I did it twice!
Twice!
Woohoo!
Woo!
Oh, wow! I hope you have the best time and the best of luck at the Olympic Games.
Oh, thank you so much.
Go, Melissa!
Okay. We're starting with a light note, and we'll move into better things, or more difficult things to talk about, I guess. So this is going to be my agenda for the day. We'll discuss politics and the Olympic Games explained, a brief history of politics at the Games, the famous or infamous Rule 50, which is the one that has been changing by the minute, as I said, and it's the one that preclude athletes from demonstrating at the Olympics. Then I'll give you some samples of athletes raising their voices despite the rules, connection between sport and politics, the situation today, and final words on whether we should allow political demonstrations at the Games. And as I said, I think that question has been answered by now. Here you have something that just happened, the Euro Cup. Those of you who follow soccer, you know that in most of the games, in all the games actually, England played. They kneeled and teams followed them. Here is with Germany in the finals. And that is obviously a sign that athletes have decided to have a voice and use their voice. And I think that's quite encouraging. Sport has been kind of put in a corner when it comes to issues of social justice, issues of race, issues of inequalities and lack of inclusivity and so on and so forth. And so I think finally they are beginning to not only have a voice they always have had, but they are using it. And I think that is the difference. And they have used it in the past as well, as we will see in a second, but with serious consequences. They have paid serious consequences for using their voice before. 127 years of Olympics since the International Olympic Committee had been on. It started in 1894, was the first time that they got together, a group of people, Pierre de Coubertin being the most important one, and decided to have Olympic Games, what it's called the modern Olympic Games, after almost 1,500 years of no Olympics, since Theodosius I canceled the games in a long time ago, 393 BC. And so it was a long time without Olympics. And now finally we have Olympics again. But one of the mantra of the Olympics has been that politics and the Olympics do not mix. And that has been quite visible in all the comments, in all the press releases, and in the history. And yet, what I want to demonstrate today with the talk, one of the things that I want to share with you is that that has not been the case. That politics has been very much a part of the Olympics. And the question for us is, what kind of politics? And that's what I want to explain a bit later. There has been two attempts to actually replace the Olympics. One was in 1936. And if you know anything about the Olympics, you know that in 1936, the International Olympic Committee gave Hitler a perfect opportunity to promote the Nazi regime in Berlin. At the same year, Barcelona, who lost to Berlin when they were bidding for the games, invited all the countries not to go to Berlin, come to Barcelona. We'll do what they call Olimpiada Popular, a People's Olympiad. And unfortunately, Spain was going through a lot of turmoil at the time. And soon after this was kind of beginning to be organized, Hitler and Mussolini, and obviously Franco himself, were to attack the government in the Republic in Spain. And it will be the end of democracy in Spain, and therefore the end of these games. So the first attempt, serious attempt, to have kind of a parallel games to the Olympic Games went down even before it began. And we lost, obviously, Spain as a democratic nation as well. I think it's good to say that also Hitler used this opportunity to try some of the weapons that they were planning to use in World War II. So Spain was a catalyst for a number of things, but also, as you can see, for the Olympic Games. The second attempt to replace the Olympic Games was in Indonesia, Sukarno, in 1963. He organized what it was called the Ganefo Games, the Games of the New Emerging Forces. And the idea was to actually mix politics and sport, as Sukarno himself said at the opening ceremonies. So we had these games in Jakarta, and they happened, and they were well attended. Over 50 countries, in fact, attended, 50 at the time. That was a big number. And the IOC reacted immediately, telling the countries, sure, you can participate, but any athlete who participates at the Ganefo Games cannot participate. Oddly enough, the games coming up were in Tokyo as well, 1964. They cannot participate in Tokyo. And only two countries sent their best athletes. That country was Indonesia, the hosting country, and North Korea. Surely enough, at the games in Tokyo, those athletes were not allowed. Although they tried to get into the games, they were not allowed to participate. And so those two attempts, as I said, to replace the Olympic Games with something more realistic, quote unquote, did not succeed. Now, I did a few kind of a historical summary of some of the most important Olympic issues and political issues around the Olympics. In 36, obviously, the Nazi Olympics. In 48, the Soviet Union joining the Olympic movement, but in a separate way. They were hosted in separate buildings, and it was kind of the Cold War at the Olympic Games. People thought that was going to be the end of the games, and they were actually quite wrong. The Cold War, if anything, highlighted the games, because now everybody was quite expectant to see what's going to happen at the games. Who is going to win? Is it going to be the USA? Is it going to be the USSR? So it became even more, the rivalry was even bigger. Interestingly enough, at the first games after the war, Germany and Japan, the two losing countries, were not invited to compete at the London Olympics in '48. So in terms of making, I have to say, I fully agree with that decision, by the way, but it's a political decision. The games, the Olympic Games, were making political decisions, and that's basically my point. In '64, Indonesia and North Korea were suspended. We already talked about that. In '68, South Africa is banned from the Mexico Olympics because of their apartheid policies in South Africa, which I strongly supported, of course. But it's a political decision nonetheless. And just a week before the games in Mexico City, over 200 Mexican students were killed by the military. And the Olympics were quite silent about it. And the Olympics went on with no one word saying, well, what happened here and should we do something about it? 1972 in Munich, 11 Israeli athletes and coaches were killed, 3 of them in the Olympic Village, the rest in an airport where they were, a battle ensued after the whole situation. In '76, the second largest Olympic boycott in our own Montreal Olympics, where African countries decided to boycott the Olympics. In 1980, in Moscow, the largest Olympic boycott with 65 countries not coming. In '84, the following one, the third largest Olympic in LA with 14 countries boycotting. And in the year 2000, when things got better, still Afghanistan is suspended from the Sydney Olympics. If you remember, in 2000, the Taliban was in charge in Afghanistan, and they were not allowing women to be a part of their team, and therefore the IOC reacted to it. So as you can see, just in this list of things, there are a lot of politics involved. So for the Olympics and the IOC to say that politics and the Olympic Games do not mix, it's difficult to sustain, isn't it? At the Berlin Olympics, this was clearly political demonstrations. This is the soccer German team at the Olympics and doing the Nazi salute. This is particular athletes doing the same. And so the connection and the mixing of political demonstrations and the Olympics has been going on for a long time. It's not new. So for the IOC to sustain and to insist that the Olympics are free of politics is a fallacy. It's not true. And then we get to the 1968, perhaps the most iconic picture of the Olympics ever, with Tommy Smith and John Carlos on the podium raising black gloves and being bare feet. They had just their black socks on, protesting the situation in the States and the status of African Americans in the state. This has been iconic and kind of a turning point in some ways on saying, well, here you have an athlete who finished first and third in the 200 meters, and Peter Norman, the Australians, they are also supporting them, by the way, by wearing a button supporting the civil rights movement in the States. The penalty, there are going to be consequences. They are not going to lose their medals, but they are going to lose their ability to stay. They are kicked out of the Olympic Village. They are kicked out of the Olympics, and they are never again allowed to compete at the Olympics. And that was the price, then the consequences that Tommy Smith and John Carlos are going to pay. Now there is this famous, insidious, as I call it, Rule 50, that no kind of demonstration or political, religious, or racial propaganda is permitted in any Olympic sites, venues, or other areas. This is the famous Rule 50. This has been changed, by the way. Now athletes are allowed to do demonstrations in interviews prior to the competition. So now there is only one area that demonstrations and protests are not allowed, and that area is the podium. the podium must remain politically free, if you will. And I think everybody, well, people who follow the Olympics and me in this case, I'm anxiously waiting what's going to happen to the first athlete who is going to do something on the podium. Everybody, including Richard Pound, Vice President, the Canadian Vice President of the International Olympic Committee, already said there are going to be consequences. They are not saying what is going to happen, but they are going to be consequences. So what has been the response? And the response has been fabulous in many places. One of them is the U.S. Olympic Committee, who has never been very supportive, by the way, of athletes. They are athletes, I may say, and the Paralympic Committee in the USA, who said, we are allowing our athletes to protest at the games. Not only that, I read just yesterday in the New York Times that they are prepared to pay, if there is any penalty in money, to pay that penalty, but they are supporting their athletes and their right to protest on the podium. That is unique. Canada has issued similar supports, by the way, to the Canadian athletes. The question is what the penalty is going to be. Because if the penalty is to lose their medals, that could be a different reaction. And reading what's going on with the Olympics, I will very much doubt that very harsh penalties are going to happen. But that is, again, here we are in speculating what could happen and what could not happen. Thomas Bach, the president of the International Olympic Committee, just said not long ago that the organization's Athletes Commission will explore ways Olympians can show support for the principles enshrined in the Olympic Charter in a dignified way. In other words, okay, you can demonstrate, but not on the podium and in a dignified way, whatever that means. And so I think the question is still up in the air whether it's going to be demonstrations or not. The U.S. athletes particularly are embracing this opportunity. They are all excited about it, and they have been demonstrating even at the Pan Am Games last year, actually 2 years ago in Lima, in Peru, where you saw two athletes. Here you have a fencer, Raisin Imboden, kneeling on the podium. And he was penalized, by the way, by the USA. And hammer thrower, Wayne Berry, who also gave a Black Power salute or a Black Power salute on the podium. This is in the Pan Am Games in Lima. And she did something similar during the tryouts for the Olympics. So it's expected that something is going to happen. That is, and that's my reading as well. So the question, I think, for us, and this has been in the media a long time, and it was one of the conflicts that, if you remember, some of the members of the Trump government were saying that athletes should just shut up and dribble, meaning you just play sports and nobody cares about your political opinions. Well, I think things have changed quite a lot since then. And athletes are not just playing sports. They are expressing all kind of Naomi Osaka, without going further, and mental health issues, but not only mental health issues. You remember, she was wearing a mask with different names of different African Americans killed by the police in the States. Every game, she wear a different mask with a different name. So athletes are beginning to be extremely outspoken, and that is, for someone like me, extremely encouraging. Now, what has been the connection so far? And I'm going to run a bit faster here because I think you're fully aware that the connection between a sport and politics has been evident. When the Super Bowl, for instance, combined the choirs of the U.S. Military Academy, the Naval Academy, the Air Force Academy, the Coast Guard, and the U.S. Army Herald Trumpets. In other words, sport has always been very keen in inviting the army and the military and honoring them and saluting them with the military honors. So the symbol of war has been present. Here you have militaries, at the MLS Cup champions doing a military salute. So the military has no problem in being connected to a sport. And here you have what are the symbols in some of the soccer games, and this has been displayed in European soccer quite disturbingly, and not only flags, but some players now. This player, George Katiris, was penalized for doing the Nazi salute on King, but they have had a space to do this. more expressions of Nazi flags among the fans, especially it has been this is in Lazio in Italy. So the question is, should we allow politics at the Olympic Games? I think it's the wrong question. I have to be honest. The question is, what kind of politics is what should we allow? Because flags and national anthems and marching and military presence has been always present in games. In fact, if you go to a varsity game at your university, chances are before the game, you're going to have to stand up and listen. And if you want to follow, you can sing the national anthem. So there has been a connection between the military, the flag, the anthems, and sport. And that is a political connection, obviously. The question is, what about other groups? What about peace groups? Have you ever seen a peace group having the opportunity to demonstrate or to display their opinions and ideas in an important sport event? Never. They don't have a space. Environmental groups, they don't have a space. Groups fighting against racism. And so this is, I think, the space and the area where I feel it has been neglected by a sport. They have no problem connecting with military and war. They have problems connecting with peace. And is that a bit of a contradiction? Because they say that sport unites countries and is a friendship connected to sport. And I have a hard time seeing it. I haven't seen it in the history of a sport and in the history of the Olympic Games. So in concluding, and I think it's I want to I want to see your questions. Like many social and political issues, this issue has many levels. We don't have a black and white issue. Some politics, the official one, have always been a part of the games. Perhaps it is time to expand those political expressions or ban them altogether. Usain Bolt, perhaps the most recognized athlete in the world, recently said, if you believe in something, Black Lives Matter, for instance, then you should do it. Take a knee on the podium. So there you have it. One of the most recognizable Olympians is supporting the idea of expressing your political opinion. Granted, he never did any political protest while competing. In a nutshell, we already have tons of politics at the Games. However, we're missing many political ideas to be advanced at the Games: social justice, women issues, environment, race, peace. So we need to be ready to respond on the stage, because if we allowed political expressions to be done, we have to be ready for other ideas as well. Ideas that we may not be in favor of, anti-women ideas, pro-Nazi ideas, racist ideas. And welcome. I would love to be able to discuss those ideas with the people advancing, I will call them, and I don't want to be biased here, negative ideas. So that's what I presented for you today, and I would love to see if you have any comments or questions about it. Thank you.
Hernan, thank you so much. That was really compelling, and you certainly made a very strong case for politics being part, almost an essential part of the Olympics, or certainly as far back as the modern Olympics goes. So I want to thank you for that. And we do have some questions already, and it's interesting because they're about clothing, Hernan, and probably something you've heard before. So it won't be a big surprise. And no. It's interesting because one of the people who asked a question said this isn't a political issue, and I'm on the fence about that. I think there's a political issue here. What are your thoughts about the Norwegian women's beach handball, I'm thinking volleyball team, being fined for wearing shorts instead of bikini bottoms, while the men's team are allowed to wear shorts instead of Speedos?
I saw it in the news. I was definitely appalled. I couldn't believe that they were asking those athletes to wear a bikini when competing, playing handball on the sand. Absolutely unacceptable. And I know that they did wear their shorts and they were fine. I think they paid 50 euros. I don't know if as a team or per head. Absolutely unacceptable. I know that's not the Olympics. That team, sand handball is not a part of the Olympics. But women being objectivized, being sexualized, it's even beach volleyball that is not doing that any longer. Athletes have the opportunity to wear even long pants if they want, and long shorts and shirts, and We were just playing. Well, the teams were playing in Sochi in Russia, and it was pretty cold, and they were all quite covered. In Rio, in the last Olympics, some of the Muslim players were fully covered, playing on the beach. So those rules has been lifted, at least at the Olympic level. But as I said, this was not in the Olympics, but still, it's unacceptable. Females should dress whatever way they want to dress. Nobody should impose the way that they have to dress. So I fully agree. Thank you for that question. It's a great one. And it's one that beach volleyball players are always asked, of course, because they play in bikinis when they want to play in bikinis. As I said, they don't have to. So
That's
thank you.
great.
Thank you for that question.
Thank you, Hernan, for your answer. Much appreciated. Next question is, why has the International Olympic Committee been so keen on punishing athletes who advanced political ideas at the Games?
I think they are very hung up to the mantra, their motto of Olympics and politics do not mix. And what they mean by that, it's mainstream politics is fine. Again, I'll repeat, nationalism and the flags and the army, and that politics is fine. But when you're talking about peace and racial equality or opportunities, and that they seems to be on the fence. They claim that their worries that there are going to be people offended by other political demonstrations. Well, I have news for them. There are people offended as it is for what they are allowing to happen. For the connection with the army, I cannot emphasize that enough. The connection with nationalism and national and flags and many people have advanced the idea that the Olympics should be about athletes. Move away from flags. The answer to that is I would love to see that. I don't know if the listeners here are aware that in Sydney in '56, for the first time in the closing ceremonies, teams were allowed to come all together as athletes. They don't march by countries. They march as all the athletes who participated at the Olympics joining in friendship together. I think the opening ceremony should be the same. Move away from countries and make the athletes represent the countries, fair enough, but stop that flagging and marching and military salutes and all of that. So I think it's an anachronism. I think it's just old thinking, and my feeling is going to move away. The Olympics, I value them. I've been in them, as you in the introduction you mentioned. I have serious problems with the way it's structured right now, and my feeling is that it's going to change. There is a whole new group of leaders and athletes who are voicing their opinions quite strongly and loudly, and so I think changes are beginning to happen. Maybe somebody's going to ask this question, but let me put it right in front of there. The fact that there has been less women invited to compete at the Olympics, to me, it's an insult to men and women, to humans. That women have not had 50-50 participation at the Olympics. They claim that finally in France, in Paris, the following Olympics is going to be 50-50. But it has been appalling, the discrimination against women at the Olympics. Appalling. I cannot say enough about that.
Someday, maybe we should have you back and we can talk about gender discrimination at the Olympics, because I'm really curious about the issue of, certain women have more testosterone than others and are therefore excluded from sport. Really fascinating issue. I do want to stick to the topic at hand, and we have questions piling up, so I'm not going to hijack this lecture. I have a question from Frank Clark. Hi, Frank. On the issue of what kind of politics should be allowed, who gets to decide that? For example, when authoritarian states host the Olympics, will athletes be able to protest against restrictions on political freedoms?
Oh, hi, Frank. Great question. Thank you. I didn't expect anything less from you. Well, I think we have to be prepared to accept all kind of opinions, and I think in that sense, when we talk about freedom of expression and the ability to express our political opinions, I think we have to be prepared to discuss them. The next Olympics, the Winter Olympics, are going to be in China. There are serious talks about human rights violations in China. Well, that conversation has to happen. Somebody, one of my students in the last year's class said, what about if an athlete goes to the podium with a banner saying, I am anti-abortion? Fair enough. Okay, if we are going to allow athletes to demonstrate, let's discuss it. Let's go at it. Respectfully, but let's go at it. Because otherwise, who is going to decide? No, you can talk, but no, you cannot talk. This is what has been happening so far. What I'm suggesting here is that we should open it. We should open it and be prepared to go into the discussion and make it, put the cards on the table. In other words, I think it will be healthier that we talk about it as opposed to now being either suppressed or making decisions that you can talk but you cannot talk, or you can do this but you cannot do this. That is, I think, a recipe for disaster. Not only at the Olympics, at universities, everywhere. We need to be prepared to discuss these issues everywhere. So, thank you, Frank.
Thank you. Next question is a question from Stephanie, and Stephanie asks, and I mean, you may not want to answer on behalf of Melissa, but Stephanie's curious whether Melissa will be presenting any political beliefs during her games, and does she have any apprehensions about it?
Interesting, great question. I don't know if she's going to do something. I know at the last tournament she played in the States, she had a sticker with Black Lives Matter, supporting the Black, and her partner Sarah as well, and Brandy Wilkinson, also a York alumni, who is also at the Olympics in Tokyo. She also had it. So I think our athletes have been vocal and active. But I don't know what their plans are for Tokyo, I have to be honest. So I haven't discussed that with Melissa, believe it or not.
Fair enough. No, fair enough. It's her decision to make, and probably not an easy one. So I'm getting questions that are a little bit off topic, but I think, it'll be interesting for the audience to hear your opinion on the politics of COVID-19 and the Olympics.
Sure. I think that has been very difficult on everybody, on the one side, some are saying, listen, we need something to get our heads out of what we have been facing for a year and a half. We need an event that will help us to distract ourselves. And on the other hand, we say, hold on, what we're doing here is insane. Well, it's not the first time that we have been doing insane things at the Olympics. When they organized the 48 Olympics after World War II, they say, how are you going to organize the Olympics after the war? There's no food, there is not, teams don't have money to come to the Olympics. And they did it, and it was successful, and it helped. So I think in that sense, there is something to be said. And I was listening to Richard Pound, Dick Pound, Canadian Vice President of the International Olympic Committee yesterday, talking about, sport can improve the world. And I think he's being a bit optimistic, but sport has a role in improving the world, and we don't always use it. And this is perhaps an opportunity like that. Now, I feel really sorry for Japan. Japan is hosting, and yet they are watching the games on television like we are doing here in Toronto or anyone else around the world. In other words, they are hosting, they are spending the money, but they are just like any other country watching the games. And I think the last time I checked, it was around 70% of the people in Japan were opposed to the games, which is not unusual, by the way. Cities and countries who host the games, usually the people from that city are not very keen on hosting. I don't know if you read in the news today that, we have Paris next, then we have LA, and now Brisbane in Australia is hosting the so we're going to have Olympics for a long time. Are they being reckless? I thought they were doing okay, but the last information I hear, it's there are at least over 40 cases already in the Olympic Village of athletes or coaches. And just in beach volleyball, Melissa was telling me there were a few cases. And so it's a tough one. I think we're all crossing our fingers that nothing major is going to happen, that most of the athletes are going to be safe. Is it crazy? If you ask the athletes participating, they said, all we want is to have the right to compete, and then we'll go home and protect ourselves. Waiting over a year for the games has been a nightmare for the athletes. But I know it's a selfish look at it. It's very selfish. It's just looking at the athlete's perspective. I don't think that there's going to be a major impact on Tokyo itself in terms of spreading the virus. Either way, from athletes to the people in Tokyo, or from the people of Tokyo to the athletes. I think this is going on around and I'm concerned. Absolutely, I'm concerned. Should maybe the Olympics should have not happened? Maybe not. Maybe not. But here we are. Just yesterday, also in the paper, in the media, was that the games can still be canceled at any moment. I doubt it. It could, but I doubt it. I've been wrong before, so I doubt it. So, but that is a big concern. It's a huge concern.
Thanks for sharing your thoughts on that. I have a couple of really excellent questions in queue that I want to make sure we get to.
Okay.
The first one is Emily McCullough, who writes, when the Olympic Games is promoted as a global event to showcase the highest levels of performance, the global community seems to forget that these games don't actually host equal representation, which you pointed out yourself, Hernan, earlier. Thus, is there an argument for the responsibility of athletes who make it to that level of sport to give a voice to the voiceless? When phrased this way, shouldn't the IOC be responsible for explicitly promoting and supporting the political platform they provide and covet?
Hi, Emily. How are you? Great question, of course, coming from you. I didn't expect anything less as well. You know my answer. I fully agree with you. Absolutely. There is a responsibility together with, and there is a privilege. Once you made it to the games, sure, you worked very hard and you made it to the games, but you have a responsibility to be a voice for those who didn't make it, for those who are not there. And for those who are not there, for also not necessarily for performance reasons. Caster Semenya comes to mind immediately to me. The two young athletes who were denied because of their testosterone levels being too high, something that you, Julie, already mentioned. To me, that is appalling. And yes, absolutely, athletes who are at the games must voice. It's a part of the social justice discourse that must be expressed at the games. So yes, they have a responsibility. I think it's they may say no. I'm just and Michael Jordan used to say, I'm here just to play basketball. Don't ask me about racial issues. And I think that was, with all due respect to Michael Jordan, that was wrong. He had a responsibility. He had a voice. He was rewarded very well for being good at basketball. And he had a voice. And he had a platform that he didn't use. He's using it now, by the way. But not when he was very famous at the peak of his career. So, yes, Emily, you're absolutely right. They should, and the IOC should allow that voice. In fact, they should encourage.
Love that point of view. Thank you. Last question for you is from Yuka Nakamura, I believe is how you pronounce the last name. And I'm sorry, Yuka, if I got that wrong.
You got it right.
Did I? Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I'm doing well today. How do you think the status of a sport, team versus individual, for example, or the funding of high performance athletes, Canada versus the US, for example, shapes the ability of athletes to be political?
Wow. Thank you, Yuka. Great to see you. That's a very good question. And I think that there is a connection. There is a connection. In the US, athletes are usually better supported financially. I know some athletes who have changed, in fact, who have that double nationality and Canadian Americans, and they have decided to become US citizens because they have more chances there, more chances for sponsors, more chances. We have a system here which we support only the good ones for the most part. If you are in the top 8, you're going to have this carding and this money, but to get to the top 8 in the world, you have to, well, you need money, you need resources, and so it's difficult to make it with no support. I was talking to a member of the coaching staff of the national team yesterday, and one of the differences, one of the things that is keeping us from competing is the lack of resources. The parents that have to pay, or friends have to pay their expenses when they travel and they go to compete, and so on and so forth. It was a second part to your question you got on the funding, but then how that impact. Can you remind me the second part of the question?
It was, hold on, I just want to find the question again. It was about the status of a sport, team versus individual, and the funding for high performance sport.
Correct. So as I said, in Canada, if you don't have rich parents, it's not a secret. Richard Gruneau, a sports sociologist that I respect tremendously, did quite a lot of studies on the social class belonging of our Olympic athletes. And most of them come from upper middle to upper classes. And so if you don't have money, if you don't have parents with money, the chances for you to make it to the Olympics are quite limited. There is more support in the States. Yes, there is more support. And there are some other countries that they have tons of support. Canada, in that sense, we have been always a bit in the back, catching up on how we support our athletes. So in terms of individual and team sports, we have I don't know exactly the answer to that question. In other words, how that makes a difference. I know that team sports, volleyball, for instance, to be, if you're a member of the indoor volleyball team, you have everything paid for. If you go to compete, the tickets are paid for, the uniforms are paid for, the hotels are paid for. So once you made a team and you're trying to get to the Olympics, all your expenses are going to be covered. In beach volleyball, which is considered not a team sport, although it's two of them, but it's not individual either, but it's not team sport, you have to pay your tickets to go to tournaments, you have to pay your hotel to go to tournaments, you have to pay your equipment, you have to basically pay everything. You can be carded, yes, but if you're a member of the team sport, I think it's much easier to make it. Now you have to make the team. That's the secret. So yeah, thank you, Yuka. Good question.
Thank you, Professor Amanya. I really want to thank you for spending this time with us and sharing this really fascinating work with us. Please let Melissa know that her fellow York alumni are cheering her on.
Thank you. I will mention it to her, and I thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk and discuss these issues that are so close to my heart and my academic work. It's my passion, of course. So, and thank you all of you who attended it. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. The pleasure's ours.
Let's go Canada.
Yes, go Canada. Absolutely. Thanks again. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Before we say goodbye to you in the audience, I want to thank you also for taking the time to join us today. And we have one last poll question for you. How would you rate your knowledge of today's topic following this lecture? So that will pop up on your screen. Please do take a moment to respond to that. Our next Scholars Hub at Home lecture is coming in August, on Wednesday, August 4th at 12 Eastern Time. Join us for Advanced Style, Confronting Gendered Ageism Online. It should be a really good one. And join us again on Wednesday, August 18th at 12 noon Eastern for Immunity and COVID-19. For information about these upcoming Scholars Hub at Home events or any of our other virtual events, please visit our website at yorku.ca/alumni and friends. Thank you once again for taking the time to be with us today, and be well.